All right.
All right, Lane, thank you very much. And thanks to everyone for joining us today. Very happy to be here again. My name is Pete Langus. I'm the Senior Director of Strategic Partnerships, Distribution, and International at Nerdio. I've been with the company about 3.5 years and seen quite a bit of growth and a lot of excitement, obviously, over the public cloud and specifically Azure as it's really taken off in the last year or 2 years. So today I'm going to talk about getting ready to sell cloud, and specifically, how do you really get yourself set up for success in terms of building and growing an Azure practice. So if you look at, what's happening in the world today, you have this whole concept of digital transformation, and really, as our friend at Microsoft says here, that, every business really becomes a software business because there's all kinds of different levers that you're going to need to be using in your businesses, that your customers are going to need to use in their businesses to really be able to compete going forward. So this whole concept of digital transformation really taking hold, and we see it, in a lot of different areas. The first one, and a lot of this will become very obvious, but the first one is the amount of data that's out there. So we're collecting tremendous amounts of data each and every day. Our customers are doing this, and then it becomes, okay, what do you do with all that data? How do you analyze it and use it to really drive your business? And how do you use it to maybe predict what's going to happen in your business? And we've made this shift from technology being a cost center into technology really being a big lever for companies to be able to have competitive advantages and serve their customers better and so forth. So really exciting what's going on there. And really what's enabling all this is the cloud. And so our customers are seeing it, we're seeing it. But this whole shift to moving our infrastructure into the cloud is growing faster and faster every year. Again, somewhat stating the obvious here, but we've gotten to the point now where what used to be only available in terms of the power of infrastructure to very large companies has now been pushed downstream to the smallest of companies and everything in between. So some very good opportunities for us all here to take advantage of this. You can see the stat over here, but the expectations are that by 2025, so 5 years from now, 60% of this infrastructure computing is going to live in the public cloud, and a great portion of that is going to be Azure. So huge opportunity in front of us. The question comes up, why the cloud? And we do know that most MSPs are really accelerating their cloud adoption, and it's really a very high priority this year and beyond for SMBs. And why is this happening? And the first one really, I think there's 3 big ones. The first one is about performance. So when you start talking about the security of the cloud, it used to be everyone was very wary of the public cloud and they thought it wasn't going to be secure. And then what you saw happen was all of a sudden Office 365 came out and people started adopting that, and organizations realized that maybe the public cloud is pretty secure. Maybe having a company like Microsoft behind it is going to ensure that things are very secure and there's going to be maximum protection in place. So that gravitation towards better security, I think, is in line of performance is really one of the big drivers here. And then you have the things that go along with that's really inherent in the cloud: the flexibility, the scalability of it, the ability to grow things very quickly, the ability for it to be elastic, meaning that you can go up and down and in and out as needed, almost on demand if you need to. So different kinds of performance that we traditionally would expect than in an on-prem model. Then you have the ease of management with the cloud. So, going back to that concept of scalability in the cloud, if I wanted to add additional space, I can, using tools, I can go in there and do that at the click of a button and have it happen almost instantaneously versus the old paradigm of driving out and putting more storage into a server. So being able to manage things very quickly, easily, accurately is very important. And then the last one, I think, and this really speaks volumes, is the reliability of the cloud. Excuse me there. The idea that, again, you have a company, a $1 trillion company like Microsoft running your cloud and your infrastructure, you can feel pretty good about the ability of it to stay up 99.99% of the time and be highly reliable. So these are some of the reasons, I think, and there's many more, but really top 3, these are the reasons that we're seeing this really movement of our customers into the cloud. In order to sell customers on the cloud, so let's presume that they've decided that this is something they want to do. There's really 5 different things that we tend to look at as we're talking to different MSPs, and that fits into our solution. But what are the kind of the 5 things that have to happen? The first one really is, is it the right solution? And this has to do with mindset more than anything else. So, we still run into people that are saying, I'm not comfortable with the cloud. I don't know where my stuff is. I want to be able to look at lights and stuff. So, first thing is the organization embracing the whole idea of their IT infrastructure living somewhere other than on-prem or in a colo center that they could drive out and look at. The second thing we look at is having the right alignment. So is everyone in the organization on board with cloud? What's been very interesting in both technology and specifically in the cloud in the last few years is this concept of non-IT people really driving a lot of decisions. So for instance, you'll have a VP of sales saying that from a technology standpoint, from a CRM standpoint, they want to look at a platform, and it is not always an IT decision anymore. Although IT may have some input into it, there's other parts of the organization that are getting involved. And so there has to be alignment from top down, line of business managers and so forth to make sure that everyone is okay with this solution being in the cloud. There's also the question of timing. So someone obviously who's done a refresh in the last year or two might not be a good candidate for the cloud, but someone who's coming conversely off that refresh cycle, or where it's time to start looking at hardware, or new hardware, that's a good time to perhaps steer them towards the cloud. The technology has to be right. I think most cases and most workloads can work very well in the cloud, but there are certain things that maybe aren't as appropriate for the cloud. And then the last thing is the financial model. So here, this has been a very big shift. We've gone from very capital intensive workloads into something that's more an operating expense. And so that has to line up with the organization as well. I think most of the time we can agree that that's a better way of doing things, but there's still some organizations that for whatever reasons still prefer to have assets and have more of a CapEx type model. So these are kind of the things that have to line up for the cloud to happen. The thing I didn't really talk about too much was cost. So one thing I always try to point out is as we're looking at cloud for the customer, it's not always about saving money. It's not always going to be about us saving them money. It's really more about a different way that the customer pays. So it's lining up the workload and the capacity they need and the flexibility they need with the cash outflow on their part. So to go in and say that I'm going to save a customer 30 or 40% just by moving them to cloud, I'm not sure that always is going to happen. I'm not sure it's even going to be 10%. What I am sure of is that over time, if I start factoring in total cost of ownership and productivity gains and soft costs, then I can usually make a pretty compelling case. But I need to be wrapping things in about reliability and flexibility and some other things that are a little hard to quantify. So, maybe a better way of saying this is if I look at hard dollars, dollar to dollar on-prem versus cloud, maybe I can't make a strong case, but when I start wrapping in those soft costs and all the advantages I get with the cloud, then that's where it becomes very powerful. And again, it's more of a philosophical sale. It's not as much of a cost-based sale as a philosophical where the organization is saying, you know what, I want to be in the cloud for these reasons. It's more flexible, it's more reliable, and so on. In terms of partners, though, selling in the cloud, there's some things we need to consider. So, it's really a different business model. It's not where we go out and we sell a piece of hardware that we bought at X and sell it for 1.2X and collect the difference on that. This is an operating expense type model, right? So our cash flows are going to happen and our revenue is going to happen over time, not necessarily in big chunky revenue that we're used to. So that has impact on the business in terms of how you structure it, how you compensate people. And so it's definitely a different way of thinking, but it can become very powerful as you start having these very happy and sticky customers because they're recurring revenue based. You're adding on services, so that really expands your average revenue per user. And then you'll see with the cloud, one of the big advantages you're going to get is operating leverage. So in theory, you should be able to do a lot more, have a lot more customers with less work. So if you look at everything I just said, And if you agree with all of that, the question comes up really, what's stopping customers moving to the cloud? If the cloud is so great and the cloud is so powerful and has all these advantages, both for the customers and the MSPs, what's stopping it? And the big thing comes down to what we call MSP inertia. And let me dive into that a little bit. So as we go around the country and we're talking to different MSPs and they've played around with Azure, or they've looked at Azure, or they've tried to do some stuff in the cloud, this is what we consistently hear. Azure's too expensive, Azure's too complex, and it's too risky. I don't want anything to do with it. Or cloud is all of these three. And we've heard this time and time again. And let me explain what I mean by all these. On the expensive side, if you were to take an on-prem solution and look at what it would cost to replace that versus taking those servers and those workloads and moving them into Azure, and let's just use Azure for the sake of argument here. If you were to do that and look at apples to apples and ran everything in Azure 24/7, you wouldn't even be able to come close to making a compelling case to doing this. So that's one thing that we hear. The second thing we hear is that if you're going to build out an Azure practice, you're going to need to hire some engineers because maybe your staff doesn't have the wherewithal or the technical expertise to be able to work in Azure. And you're going to need to hire those engineers. You're going to need to train them. You're going to need to certify them. You're going to need to retain them in today's very tight labor market. So the perception is it's going to be very expensive to build that practice along with running a workload in Azure. So that's the expensive bullet. We also hear that Azure is very complex, and no argument there. If you look at all the different services that exist within Azure, trying to figure out how you're going to put everything together, which services are you going to pick, how are you going to make them work together, how are you going to price it, it all becomes a lot of pieces to a very complicated puzzle. So this one we see, and we couldn't agree more on this. And then the last thing we hear is that Azure is perceived as risky. And again, if you look at a traditional way of doing things where we're used to buying a server and wrapping some services around it, and now I come into Azure and I have to do consumption pricing where it's kind of pay as you go and you're not really knowing what that bill is going to be, it starts to get a little scary in terms of what is your margin going to look like when you actually roll this out. No one wants to be the one that has to go to a customer and say that I built the solution for you and I'm not making enough money on it, I need to upcharge you. You want to be pretty confident in how you're going to market in terms of pricing and margin. And then there's the whole idea of risk in terms of hiring people. So if I go out and I hire a bunch of Azure engineers, what's going to stop them from leaving? What's going to stop them from not having enough work? And that becomes a little bit daunting at times too. So again, in summary, Azure's perceived as expensive, complex, and risky. And I think what we're really saying in our community is that for Azure, I'm not sure there's enough reward. For Azure, it seems like it's going to be a lot of work. And if I go in Azure, it seems like there's going to be a lot of risk there. These are really the things I think that keep us, that build that inertia and keep us from really building and growing Azure practices and by definition, getting our customers moved into the cloud, whether they're existing customers or new customers. In summary, the motivation to change, and this is all about change. This is about changing our business models. We've all built businesses, ourselves included, over the years. We know our numbers. We know the business model. We're very comfortable with it. We know how we can run these things and monetize and have a very good, healthy business. And so our motivation to change really decreases with that risk of losing customers or not gaining customers, and that complexity of the solution and the work that's going to be involved. And that motivation to change, it'll increase when we see the reward for moving that customer. So whether that's a monetary reward or a keeping customers type of reward, that's where the motivation to change can increase. So this is what we are seeing day by day by day. And for us, the philosophy is that cloud is here to stay. For most customers, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And, if you extrapolate that out to our community, I think the same thing can be true, that it's really a question of when, not if, that our businesses shift into be more and more cloud-based in terms of the solutions we provide to customers. I'm kind of a picture guy, so I kind of like to look at it like this. Like, here's the risk and the work involved in moving someone to the cloud. I think a lot of MSPs are going to look at a lot of risk up front as the business changes, and a lot of work and dies down a little bit, but still remains somewhat high. And so, what if there was a way to move your customers into Azure and make it such that there was less work, less risk, with great margins? What if it looked something more like this? What if we were able to take that risk and really drop it down, especially at the beginning, and then really lower it over time so it didn't seem so risky, it didn't seem so much work? And what if we could couple that with rewards that tend to grow over time? And the reason this happens is because once we start putting customers into the cloud, that opens up a whole ecosystem of other services. Simple example, I'm sure a lot of you have already moved customers into Office 365. There's now many solutions where you can layer on top of that backup for Office 365, which doesn't really natively exist or not very well within Office 365. That's a way where you can take, if you're charging $20 a month for Office 365, bump it up to $22 or $23, and then add on some other services. And before you know that, that $20 Office 365 seat is $30 with some managed services wrapped around it. So the really great thing about the cloud and moving into Azure is that we can see these rewards and these customers' ARPU, average revenue per user, really grow over time. And so the picture starts to look a lot different, and that reward starts to look a lot different. All right, this is the part of the presentation where I'm going to jump in and talk a little bit about Nerdio, because our mission is really to help MSPs build and grow their Azure practice, and we really consider ourselves the definitive Azure solution for MSPs. This is what we do. We've looked at those pain points that are keeping folks from moving into Azure. So we've looked at the complexity, we've looked at the expense, we've looked at the risk that's there, and we've developed our solution to address those concerns. And by investing in 4 different pillars within our solution, namely pricing, deployment, management, and optimization, we really try to help address those concerns. So, the quick bullets here, pricing. So before we can even talk about deployment and management within Azure, we really need to get something in front of the customer that the customer is going to be comfortable with. They're going to agree with the price and the solution that's built. And then just as important, the margins are going to have to work for the MSP to make sure that this is something that's going to make money over time and be a good proposition for the business. So the first thing we've done is on the pricing side, we've developed what we call our cost estimator. And this cost estimator gives you the ability to look at different standardized templates that we've built and build out different solutions within Azure. We have an IaaS solution and then a couple different desktop solutions. And by doing these, we have a very standardized architecture, very repeatable, and we let you model out different types of Azure services, different kinds of customer models, and then you can basically come up with very confidently with a price that everything's going to cost, and then add your margin on top of that and go to the customer very confidently with a good price in Azure. So we help with the pricing and also the packaging and creating different packages so that you can go to market in a different way that you might not be used to doing. The second thing we do then, so let's assume that the customer's happy with the pricing and the solution you've created. The second thing we do is we help with deployment. So we have created software that will help you deploy different workloads in Azure with very, very little work on your end. So in terms of needing high-end engineers and needing high-end technical expertise, we can greatly reduce the need for that by all this automation we've built in. The other thing we've done is we've made it very fast. So we can help you deploy workloads in between 2 and 5 hours, depending on the complexity of the workload. You can even do it without an engineer. I've done these myself. I'm not an engineer, so that's testament to how easy we've made it. Once the workload's been deployed, then the next thing you're going to want to do is manage that workload. So we give you the ability to look at all your customers. It's a hierarchy-based view, and I'll show you this in a little bit. But you have the ability to see all your customers and then go in and manage them on an ad hoc basis. So if you wanted to go in and do a name change for a user, you can do that with a couple of mouse clicks. So again, you don't have to really know how to transact in Azure so much. You just have to be able to go into Nerdio for Azure and do all your administration tasks in there. And again, we've made it super easy to do that. And then the last thing we do is we optimize the Azure environment. And so by having these standardized architectures and by helping you model out some different Microsoft levers that exist as a Microsoft partner, we're able to help you really optimize the environment from the performance standpoint, pricing standpoint, so that everything lines up very well for the solution, the customer's getting the right solution at a reasonable price, and you're still able to make very good margin on it. So those are really the four things that we try to do with Nerdio for Azure. What I want to do next is I want to tell you a little bit about who we are, and then I'm going to get in and talk a little bit more about Azure and show you very high level what Nerdio for Azure looks like from the admin portal. But I really like to talk about who we are, because one thing that everyone should understand is that we did not create Nerdio for Azure in a vacuum. We created this because we started as an MSP 15 years ago, and we recognize a lot of the challenges that MSPs face on a daily basis, not just in cloud, but just in general, but then specifically to cloud as well. So we started about 15 years ago, and our original product was really private cloud-based, and it was on the VMware stack, and we built out an IT infrastructure consulting consisting of desktops and virtual servers, and then some storage. So we would go to the SMB customer base that we pursued, and we'd say, Mr. Customer, we're going to give you a complete IT infrastructure. We're also going to layer on some traditional MSP support services and virtual CIO services, and really become your IT department and your IT infrastructure. And so we built that platform, and we did very well with it over the years. And then we ran into this wall where we had a couple hundred clients, and it was becoming very hard to scale the business, because every time we did a deployment, it was different. So we got the idea to standardize our offering, and that did a couple things. The first thing is it made it a lot easier to sell. We cooked up good, better, best type of packages. It was very easy to go to market and show customers exactly what they were going to get. And then once they selected a package, it was very easy for us to deploy it, because we wrote this software that would deploy one of those three packages in a very standardized architecture. So as you can imagine, besides making it easy to sell, the standardized architecture made it very easy for us to deploy and then manage those workloads. And so that's where we really started seeing some growth in the business. And so we figured that if that was good for us, maybe it would be good for other folks too. And so we developed a channel program. That was actually one of my first tasks when I came on board 3.5 years ago. We developed this channel program, started talking to different MSPs, and they said, private cloud, very cool, love your software, very cool that you did there. But this public cloud's coming, and I think it would be a million times cooler if you took your software and made it for Azure. We're a Microsoft partner. We're already selling Office 365. Microsoft wants us to sell Azure. We don't know how to do it. Go take Nerdio and make it for Azure, and then you'll have something. So that's what we did. We launched Nerdio for Azure in 2017, and the product has really matured and grown over the last 2 years. We've signed up many different partners. We're obviously very excited to be part of this community now too. And we think we're in the right place at the right time. Azure is gaining momentum. A lot of partners are really starting to dip their toes into Azure, or they're already very far along with Azure. And we're coming at it from the standpoint of, we're right there with you. We've been an MSP. We know the challenges. We know what you're trying to do. Here's a platform that we think can help you get where you want to get. So that's why I like to tell about who we are. The question that I guess everyone needs to ask themselves, and this is what I ask as I talk to people around the country, where are you in terms of your Azure journey? So, at the bottom is kind of like you're asking, what is Azure? And hopefully everyone's past that. The next point in the line, I guess, is really you're looking to build out your Azure practice. Maybe not sure how to do it, but you're looking to build it out. You want to get there. The next point that we'll see people at is they're currently doing something in Azure. So maybe they've thrown up some storage in there, or maybe a backup strategy, or just kind of dabbling in there and trying to figure out how to do a couple things, or maybe it's been a server or two. And then we've talked to people that they have an Azure practice, it's up and running, but they want to build scale. So they've done everything kind of ad hoc to this point, and now they want to figure out, are there ways where they can move faster and put more customers in there? So, as maybe we're going through things, think about where you are and how what we do may help you get to the next level and beyond. As you're looking at building out that Azure practice, here's a few things to keep in mind and some steps that you could take. So, Azure's very, very big. There's a lot of different services. So as an MSP, understand really what's relevant to you. A lot of it's really going to play more in the infrastructure place. That doesn't mean that you can't dabble in other things as well. But there's a lot to Azure, and so shrinking it down is something that can really help you get activated a little faster. I think it's important to look at, get familiar with the Azure terminology, the fundamentals, how you actually work with Azure. So there's different programs available with Microsoft. The CSP program is going to be the one you're going to want to get hooked into if you're not already. And I understand TAG is closely aligned with SureWeb, who's a great partner of ours too. So that's a way to get your Azure along with other things. But learn that whole terminology and the acronyms that go with Azure. Third thing is learning about how you can maximize your margin in Azure. So, traditionally we look at cloud as kind of a pay-as-you-go service. It turns out there's a lot of different ways that you can, not a lot, but there's different ways you can buy Azure that can actually greatly improve your margin. So we'll want to talk about that a little bit. And then one thing I'm a big proponent of is, while there's certainly opportunities to be reactive to your customers and putting different things, different workloads in Azure, there's a lot of merit in the idea of developing really these packaged Azure solutions that you can put an offer together and go out to your existing customers or new customers if you're trying to acquire new customers, and make something product-based that's easier to transact. And that's a good way to be more proactive and to really scale your business. Let me dive into these a little bit and give you a little more color. So, talking about what's relevant to MSPs, you're going to want to look really at IaaS, platform as a service. So, IaaS is really the virtual machines. Platform as a service is things like SQL. On the data services side, and this is getting a little bit on the edge here, but machine learning and Internet of Things, and then software as a service. Most of you are probably already doing this. So we'll have that. And pictorially, again, going back to pictures, here's a lot of what Azure does. So you can see there's many, many different things, and this is why people think Azure is complex, not unrightfully so. But you're going to want to start thinking about looking at things like compute, virtual machines there, storage, the networking components, hybrid operations. So, as much as we'd love everyone to do lift and shifts into Azure right off the bat, the reality is a lot of times it's more of a gradient where certain services or workloads get moved into Azure, and then over time those grow until eventually everything's in Azure. There's the whole security angle, Active Directory, MFA. These are some of the things that you're going to want to focus on. And Nerdio definitely helps with that as well. In terms of terminology, these are some of the terms that you're going to see out there. CSP is one way, probably the best way that you're going to want to transact. That's certainly the way Microsoft is pushing folks. Some folks can actually do that direct with Microsoft. Most other folks are going to use what's called an indirect CSP provider. So that would be, in this case, in your case, SureWeb, I think, is your preferred partner there. Customers could also certainly get Azure Direct. We're all here because we believe that there's great value in a partner really being the person that's putting that Azure solution, or the entity that's putting that Azure solution together, obviously. There's also enterprise agreements for larger companies. There's some good levers here where folks are on enterprise agreements. There's ways to get them to transact differently and actually save a lot of money. So those are some things to look at on the terminology and transacting side. In terms of the resources and the billing, we talked about these a little bit in the big jumble of all the different services, but there's compute, there's storage, there's networking. We actually have a very good white paper on our Nerdio Academy, which is part of our website. You could download this white paper. It's really a great guide on all the different resources that exist within Azure as they pertain to MSPs. Stepping back a second, there's two ways that Azure charges. There's two pieces really, two toll booths. The first one is the compute side. So that's, the resources you're using in terms of actually computing. So RAM and cores and things like that. And then there's the licensing side, the operating system. So these are really the two toll booths that go with Azure. And there's different ways within the Microsoft ecosystem to be able to consume those in different ways to really improve your margins. We talk about that a little bit. Again, we have a white paper that'll help guide you through that. So if you go to our Academy on the website, you'll be able to download that white paper that walks you through the different ways that you can optimize margin. And the two big ones that you're going to hear about are Azure Hybrid Usage, which is where you change the lever a little bit on the licensing schemes, and then Azure Reserved Instances, which gives you the ability to buy your compute resources at a reduced cost by making a commitment. The big news there is that up until a couple of weeks ago, you had to prepay those for a year or 3 year, and now you have the ability to pay those month by month. So, before it required a lot of cash outlay for MSPs to get going. Now it really lines up with how you're monetizing most Azure solutions, which is over a monthly basis. So now that cash flow lines up, your expenditures are lining up with what's coming in. So that was really, really good news and really, in our mind, a game changer for things. The other thing we do as part of our tool is we have some built-in what we call auto scaling. So that's the ability to turn workloads on or off or down, resize them, depending on schedules, seasonality, things like that. And that's another way that you can turn the toll booths down a little bit and stop the clock if you need to. Talking about different types of margin opportunities, by becoming a CSP. So hopefully most people on the call are already doing that. You'll get some good margin impact there. The reserved instances are going to give you even more margin. The Azure Hybrid Usage will give you more on top of that. And auto scaling, which is used usually not with reserved instances. It'll be used more as a way to kind of to model things out and see if that's a better way to go than reserved instances. It really depends on the situation. But again, you can see that we can really impact the margin by doing that. So, spent a lot of time talking about this, but the long and the short of it is, don't look at Azure costs and think that's what they are. There's a lot of different levers you can use to really drive down that cost and make your solutions palatable for your customer while still putting a lot of money in your pocket as well. And then the last thing, I talked about this a little bit, but again, we have a blog article on this where you can read about how to create different offers and packages. So, it could be something as simple as what we did on the private cloud when we went to market with, a different good, better, best type of environment with different things bundled in. And, we were able to charge sometimes $175, $200 per user per month on those types of packages. So there's an old saying in the industry, there's a lot of mystery in bundling. So as you start thinking of packages and bundling things together, there's the opportunity there to make a lot of margin. Okay, little explanation, and this usually comes up on how Nerdio works with Azure. And think of Azure as really all the infrastructure that you're going to be using. So it could be virtual desktops, it could be servers, it could be backup/storage, security services. But these are going to all be services and workloads that exist in Azure along with Office 365. So the typical setup is you would procure this via CSP through SureWeb, or if you have a different CSP provider. But typically you're going to get all this Azure consumption through CSP. You're going to layer on all of your traditional MSP services. So migration services, IT strategy, help desk support, everything like that. And Nerdio is really going to be this management layer in between. We're going to be the bridge between Azure and your organization. Nerdio, we don't sell Azure at all. You're responsible for that. We don't get involved in your side of the business at all. We are purely a SaaS automation platform and management platform to bridge that gap between you as an MSP and Azure. We want to make your life a lot easier in terms of working in Azure, both from a pricing standpoint and a deployment/management standpoint. We actually have 3 different plans. So we have what's called Nerdio Core, and that's for IaaS solutions. So think of it as non-desktop. Simplest example would be taking a web server that exists on-prem and then throwing that into Azure. Then we move on to 2 different desktop services or desktop plans. We have the professional plan, which is typically for under 25 desktops or so, and then the enterprise plan, which is over 25 desktops or multiple regions, where you want to add on different users who are in different on-ramp regions. So maybe someone in the US, maybe someone in the UK, and then someone in Japan. By using enterprise, you could stitch all those together and make a very cohesive solution. So 3 different plans: core, just for IaaS; professional enterprise, more for desktop environments. The question's going to come up. I think it actually may have come in already, but what about Windows Virtual Desktop, WVD? So this is going to be the new way to deploy virtual desktops in Windows. In Azure. We've been working very closely with Microsoft on that. It is supposed to go GA very, very soon. When it does, we'll be ready for that. So we actually have been running some pilots with different customers, and we'll be ready when that goes GA. And that'll be a whole different way to build desktops in Azure. We'll still have the professional license and the enterprise license that'll both be able to take advantage of WVD. So that's pretty cool. We're very, very excited about that. Okay, if I may, I think we have about 20 minutes left here. So let me do a very quick overview of what the platform looks like. And there are 4 pieces to it. So we do have the pricing component, we have the deployment component, we have the management component, and then we have the optimization. What I want to dive into a little bit is the pricing component, because I think that's a lot of times where people get stuck. So let me show you what that looks like and how we really try to help our MSPs price things out a little more easily than if they've tried to do it within either the native Azure cost calculator or try to do it on their own. Sometimes that's a big stumbling block. So let's go into that. So again, we call this the NFA cost estimator. And looks like I was doing this for someone in the UK previously. So let me go ahead and put this in US dollars. And I'll do a US region here. Okay. So the first thing that's going to happen is you're going to pick the use case. So again, we have the IaaS use case, we have DaaS, and then what we call IT as a service. So IaaS lines up with our core license, DaaS lines up with our desktop, with our professional license, and then IT as a service lines up with the enterprise license. The vision on IT as a service is that's where someone is either doing a very large desktop deployment or doing a full lift and shift of everything into Azure. But today, just to keep it at kind of the base level, let's just do an IaaS and let's price this out. So the first thing you're going to see, and let's assume that what we're going to do here is we have a customer and they're looking for 2 things. They want to, and you're guiding them on this, of course, but let's say they wanted to have a secondary domain controller in Azure, and they also wanted to move a web server into Azure. So let's see how we can price that out. So the first thing I've done is I've selected the core license right here, so the infrastructure service use case. Then I'm going to go here, and you can see that we've already pre-populated a domain controller and a file server. So that's kind of the standard deployment when we price out Nerdio Core. You have the ability to remove the file server if you wanted to. So, in this case, let's go ahead and do that. Let's take that out of the mix. But I'm going to keep the domain controller. I actually have to do that because that's the way we've architected that. And we do that based on our years of experience, and we really feel this is the best way to architect it, and also working with Microsoft in terms of best practices. So we're going to keep that domain controller, And then let's say we're going to add a web server. So we'll go ahead and do that. And I'll keep the, actually, let's change the instance size. So maybe for a web server, I don't need something quite so beefy. So I'll go to a B2, and I'm going to need to add some data. So I'll go ahead and throw a disk in there as well. So I've added a little bit of disk space. And now I've priced out an IaaS solution with a domain controller and a web server. And if I come up here, I can see that that's going to be about $221 per month. The cost is made up of $162 of Azure consumption and then $59, which is the list price on the Azure license. And that's going to be for, as long as there's new desktops, that price is going to be $59, whether there's 2 servers like we've built here or 100 servers, doesn't matter. We charge per the end user there. Okay, let me now take out some of the options here. I'll come back to those. Here's the cost assumptions we're making. So again, we've built this all out so you don't have to think about it, but typically if I'm going to stand up a web server and a domain controller in Azure, I'm going to need some room for storage. There's a standard storage that's going to come just with that with that domain controller, but also I'm pricing out storage for that web server I've added. There's going to be some bandwidth costs because there's data that's being transferred out. And then I'm going to plug in here my CSP discount. So, just for kicks, let's put the Azure CSP discount at 10. I'll leave the reserved instances discount at 0. I'm going to do it in the central US, and I'm going to do it in dollars. And if I hit view costs, and you can see what changed here is I took a reserved instance off. So we'll go back to that in a second. But here you can see my cost that we're estimating is going to be $296 per month. That's Azure plus the Nerdio license. And here I'm getting a little view of the resources that go into that. And I can also see that I'm going to build out a domain controller and a web server. And then here's the Azure cost breakdown. So you can see most of it is on the compute side, some of it on the bandwidth and IPs, and then a little bit for storage. Actually, the rest of it is for storage. So that's what my estimate is going to be. That's kind of the base case. And then I can go back and I can say, I'd really like to see if I can reduce that a little bit. Let me go in and see if I can do a reserved instance and what that does. So here, if I do a 3-year reserved instance, which again is a commitment to Microsoft that I'm going to pay for 3 years of these Azure instances, now you can see, if I view the cost, that I've gone from $296 down to $228. So pretty dramatic difference there. I've got, looks like to be something like maybe 30% savings there. And now this is a lower cost, so I can either take that margin and put it in my pocket, or I can give it back to the customer, or I can do some kind of split. But you can see that by using these different levers that Microsoft has available to us, we're really able to change the game here a little bit. So this is our cost estimator. Very quickly, I'll give you a quick view of what the rest of it looks like. Here's where you'll see all your accounts. So if I wanted to go in and say I had built this account right here based on a quote, I could go in and log in, and then I'm going to get a picture here of how many users I have in this domain. I'm going to see the servers that exist. I'm going to see VPNs I've set up. There's a wealth of information at your fingertips here, and the ability to go in and manage things very easily, very quickly with a couple mouse clicks. So that's the management side on this. The deployment side is very easy as well. All right, that's kind of a quick view, and we're happy to set up additional demos on this and show you more about what it looks like. All right. So in summary, how do we help? Well, hopefully I've shown you that we're going to be able to help you get into Azure with less risk, with less work, and a bigger reward. The less risk is going to happen with that pricing and packaging help, with our cost optimization. So you should never feel like you're going to be upside down on your costing and your pricing. The automation makes it such that you can throw lower level engineers at this. You could even throw a salesperson at this to do some of the work. But in essence, you're you're taking a lower level resource and using machines to do a lot of this deployment versus people. So you're really taking a lot of the risk out of it. Not that there's anything wrong with people, but people make mistakes. People do things differently than maybe they should have. And so, you know, we're subscribing to the notion that take your people, your best people, put them talking to customers and doing very high value activities, let the machines do these very rote day-to-day tasks. On the less work side, less work needed on the deployment and the management side. And then on the reward side, you know, hopefully this helps you with easier sales in terms of packaging and getting the pricing right, better margins, increased revenue per user, and then of course driving Azure consumption, which if you're doing that, that's good for your business, but it also will make sure that Microsoft continues to shower smiles on you as well. In terms of next steps, and I know we want to leave a couple minutes here for Q&A, you know, how do you get started with Azure? How do you get started in the cloud? How do you get started with Nerdio for Azure? To me, the easiest thing to do is to start with something internal. So if you have, for instance, if you're running an RMM server on site and you're looking at maybe replacing that, or you have a QuickBooks server on site that you're using, those are good opportunities to move them into Azure because you're not going to impact a customer. There's ways to run things, you know, in parallel before cutting over so that you don't have to worry about things going down. But that's a good way to test the waters and set up a sandbox environment that's a little bit beyond a sandbox. And then after you've done that, I always think it's easiest to maybe start with a new customer because if you have an existing customer, that can get slightly more complicated. New customer is really going to be a fresh template, a fresh slate. So find a new customer with a simple workload. Web server is a great one. QuickBooks server is a great one, and that comes up all the time. People looking to replace that aging QuickBooks server. So that would be one place to start. The next thing you could look at doing would be maybe adding on something to an existing customer. So if you have existing customers and you want to maybe add that secondary DC, not a bad idea to develop a little package around it and say, Mr. Customer, I'd like to get you started moving into the cloud. Here's a very low risk way, low cost way. We're going to throw a secondary domain controller up there. And that way, if your domain controller on site ever goes down, we'll have a way to make sure that you can keep running, something like that. And then you could take that a little bit further, create a package around it, and become very proactive with it and start selling into other customers too as maybe kind of a DR type play. If you're scared about getting into Azure at all, maybe explore the idea of a supplemental service for Office 365, just further your cloud journey. So take Office 365 and add on a drop suite or something or some other backup product that lets you leverage the fact that maybe Office 365 doesn't have great backup natively, but that's a good way to just get moving on your cloud journey. And then the last thing you could look at is an existing customer migration. So look for that timing event, look for someone who has a refresh on hardware, or they're moving, or there's mergers and acquisitions going on, but some kind of timing event usually is a good signal to start looking at moving people into Azure. The other big timing event that has gotten a lot of attention lately is the whole idea of Windows 2008 Server becoming under support in January. And so it's a good opportunity to start looking at perhaps moving those workloads off-prem and into Azure. We have a whole set of instructions and white paper on this one as too. It's at the Nerdio Academy. You can go find out how you can actually move a client off Windows 2008 Server into Azure in one day. And we outline the steps to do that. And it's a very good guide with pictures and everything. So that's another good way to kind of get going. Last but not least, make sure you check out the Nerdio Academy. It's at www.getnerdio.com/academy. All kinds of good stuff there, videos, white papers, blogs, how-to guides, a wealth of information. It's all free, and you can go in there and check that out. All right, I think I've bumped up against my limit here, so maybe we can move on to Q&A if there's any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. Anybody got any questions at all? Well, we're gonna have one question. Nope. All right. So I'm assuming everybody knows exactly what to do to get started. If not, well, you know, you can reach out to Pete. I'm the primary contact here at TAG for the Nerdio as well as the SureWeb relationships. So, you know, just reach out to me and we'll put you in touch with the right resources. You can, if you want to start to wrap your head around the pricing, you can actually do a free, what do you guys have, like a 15-day trial, Pete, available?
We actually have a 30-day trial. Yeah. So a great way to play around.
Yeah, so 30-day trial, that's what I did when I was first starting to talk with Tony, who is one of the sales reps that we've worked with. And it really helped me kind of wrap my head around how to get pricing. But do talk. I know we've had some members that were struggling with seeing how to price this compared to how they priced Cloud Jumper. And I can tell you that as they've gone through and learned the solution with the help of the Nerdio folks, that they're seeing that the price points are very, very comparable. But you're moving into, you know, an Azure platform, a much more robust platform than we'd had in the past. So if we're not going to have any questions, I guess we will close it up here. Call it a day.
Thank you very much. Appreciate everyone joining today. Feel free to reach out with any questions.
All right. Thanks, Pete. Thanks, everybody, for joining. I'll send an email link out later with a link to the recording as well, so you can share it amongst your teams.